Welcome to the Mad in America podcast, your source for science, psychiatry, and social justice.
Hello, and welcome to the Mad in America podcast. I'm Peter Simons, your host for today. Today we have with us Laysha Ostrow, the founder and CEO of Live and Learn, a research and consulting company that specializes in the inclusion of people with lived experience. She conducts research on community-driven interventions that present safe and effective pathways to independence and empowerment. Dr. Ostrow, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
To begin, I wanted to ask you about Live and Learn. Can you tell me more about your company?
Yes. So I founded Live and Learn in 2015 after I finished my PhD. And it was a small company that works with different stakeholders around the country. So providers, administrators, policymakers, people in various different systems, but with a particular focus on always making sure to include people with lived experience of those systems in our work. So we do a mix of research and consulting projects. So the consulting work ranges from small contracts with peer-run organizations that are required or interested in reporting their outcomes and looking for assistance with that, to working with state and county mental health systems. And then the research that we do is independently investigator-initiated research, like one would do in an academic setting. So we actually just got my first multi-year federal research grant, which is funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, to study the career and financial outcomes of people who get certified as a peer specialist. So that's a good example of work that sort of is initiated in some ways through consulting work on the ground with people who are doing that work, working as peer specialists, hearing those experiences, working with peer-run organizations that employ those people, and then taking those ideas and those problems and generating independent research on them.
Yeah. So that current research, that's something that you're working on right now that you just got a grant for. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm working on it all the time right now. So yeah, we're at the stage of submitting our IRB application. So yeah, I mean, so Live and Learn is it's a consulting company, but it's also came from my desire to do academic research without the desire to be in academia, I guess I would say. So it's sort of a proof of concept, I think, because a lot of the times, I mean, a lot of my experience in life has been people telling me things that I can't do, or I can't do it my way, and that's not the way that it's done. So this is just another example, I think, of like one of those things that you don't really know until you try. And yeah, sometimes you have to try a lot harder when you do it your own way. But yeah, I'm excited to get the grant, to work on that grant, because I think the project is really important. Employment has been key to my recovery. And I think we're just seeing all around the country in every socioeconomic strata that people struggle with meaningful work, well-paying work, all of that, sort of how we spend all of our time. A lot of our time is at work. And for a lot of people, it's not very good. So, but at the same time, it's sort of, there's a meta reflection there on my own work environment and what I want from my work and my life. So it was really encouraging to be able to get such a grant and to be able to do that work without being in an academic institution officially.
So what exactly do you hope to find out through this research project?
So we know that a lot of people are getting certified as a peer specialists in most of the states, and that not all of them end up working in peer support. We don't really know why. In some cases, I think in some places there aren't enough jobs. In some places the jobs aren't very good and people don't want them. Or in some places people have to work in a fairly hostile environment as a peer specialist.
You could say a little bit more about what it is to be a peer specialist and what exactly is entailed in that job.
Well, a peer specialist is sort of a newer designation for a very old form of the work, which is people providing mutual support to one another. And I'm sure many people reading Mad in America are aware that sort of grassroots mutual support happens wherever you are. It's just a thing that social animals do. including humans, and over the years has become more professionalized within the mental health system for many reasons. I think you could probably take a positive or a negative view of it. Some people are not as comfortable with the peer specialist designation because it is a professionalized credential. So people who work as a peer specialist get, they're required to have a certain amount of a certain training or selection of trainings, usually like 80 hours. And then there's some process for them to get credentialed by the state. So it varies across all the states, but it could be something as simple as submitting your certificate of attendance to that training, or taking an exam and then having a provisional certification and then needing to work a certain number of hours in order to get a full certification. And then at that point, in most of the states, there's some mechanism for a mental health provider organization to bill Medicaid or get reimbursed by Medicaid for peer specialist work. So this is very different than sort of like people gathering in each other's living rooms and providing support or engaging in political action. So there's, I think, at least two camps. I guess my perspective is that people should be paid and treated well for their work. And at the same time, we need to ensure that peer support, the way that it's carried out, is in keeping with the evidence that we have. And as everyone knows, it's hard to keep the evidence to keep up with what's happening in the real world. So the other side of it, so there's like the service user outcomes side of it. What is peer support? Is it helping people, and are peer specialists helping the people that they serve? And then the other side of that is what's happening with the workers themselves. So that's kind of the piece that I've always been interested in. My dissertation was on peer-run organizations. So we surveyed all of the peer-run organizations across the country at the organizational level. So the survey was completed by the executive directors just to see how they're operating. So that's mostly, I think, what the perspective that I've taken in my work is the perspective of the workers.
Right. So kind of how is the work impacting the actual peer specialists who are doing the work?
Yeah, because, you can never forget that the people who are working as peer specialists are the same as the people who are receiving services. We're all the same, but people are at a different point in their lives sometimes. But many of the people who are working as peer specialists are just as marginalized and disadvantaged as the people that they're serving who are on Medicaid. Many of them are on Medicaid themselves. So, it's just a different role in the system, but a lot of challenges to those jobs. So, what we're hoping to find in the career outcome study is if people aren't working in peer support, people who are working in peer support, how's that going? And for the people who aren't, where are they working? Are they still working in mental health? Are they working in a management level, quote unquote, consumer affairs position? Or did they start a business? Or did they decide to go do something else? I think for some people, my hope or my hypothesis is that getting that credential, for many people who've had bad experiences in education and work, as I have had, having one accomplishment can really help you realize that you can do things. You're empowered to do things. So, some of those people go on and get a master's in counseling or something, or a PhD. So, and then, what is for different jobs, what's the level of job satisfaction? How do they experience the workplace? Hoping to do some measurement on burnout, self-esteem, self-efficacy, just to understand the relationship between the work that peer specialists do, certified peer specialists do, and their outcomes in many different domains.
Is there kind of a tension between like the psychiatric system that peer specialists might be sort of embedded in, and the way that a peer specialist sees the work coming from someone who has lived experience?
Yeah, I think, peer specialists are on this boundary often between patients and providers. And a lot of the way that we're all situated in the world is not necessarily up to us, and may even have little to do with our training and credentials. So, I think, there's been a decent amount of research so far about the workplace experiences of peer specialists, finding that, often they are marginalized by their colleagues, so people who have a different kind of credential, like psychiatrists or psychologists or social workers, don't perceive peer specialist workers as equal members of the team. Setting aside for a moment that, we're separating providers from patients, that people feeling marginalized in their own workplace is problematic, is bad for your psychological health, regardless of the work that you do. So being a lesser member of a team is already bad for people. And then, like layered on top of that is like previous experience of surviving the psychiatric system. I think in some cases, you always identify with that experience, So, there's like research documenting, that people are sort of put in the position of still being a patient or aligning with the patient perspective more while being on the provider team. So they're really complicated dynamics that go on there. I'm interested in like, what is there for us beyond peer support? Like, I always say to people like, yeah, okay, well, look, I have plenty of lived experience, but you wouldn't want me working in peer support, I wouldn't want to do it. It would be hard for me emotionally. I prefer to be alone with my books and my writing. So I think it's great that there has been this explosion of job opportunities in peer support, because it's sort of like a first step. Like, not that long ago, there was a very common belief. I'm sure some people still hold this belief that like people who are labeled with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia can't work. They can't like meaningfully participate in their own lives, let alone society. So, I think like peer specialist credential is like a good first step, but I think it also, if we're not careful, can like narrow the choices that people have. Like, okay, you can work, you need to work. Everybody needs to do something productive and meaningful with their life. That's part of the human condition. But like, what can you do? Not, can you be a peer specialist, or your other choices to what? Be on disability. Those aren't very good choices, because it's not really a choice.
Can you maybe say a little bit about how your own experience has sort of influenced the work that you do?
Yeah. So I was first hospitalized when I was 14. I tried to run away from home, and I didn't make it very far, and that was the solution. Although I did have a very good plan. And then I was put on Paxil. I was in the hospital, and then released like 2 weeks later. And then I had a bad reaction to the Paxil. I had a manic episode and ended up back in the hospital. And then after that, it was just like a series of like being removed from school, and then, being put on other drugs, getting off those drugs, being in the hospital, being removed from another school. Eventually, I ended up in a residential treatment facility for 2.5 years. And then I graduated from there. So, in Massachusetts, where I grew up, those kinds of special education institutions are co-funded by the local school system in the state, and they award you a diploma somewhat arbitrarily, I think, because I don't remember like doing any coursework from your home high school. So and then I was told that everyone in my family's gone to college. My parents both have doctoral degrees. So it's sort of like an expectation that I would go to college, but also this very clear message that I would not be able to go to a normal college, that I had to go to like a special education school. Simultaneously, I had been living in the residential, and I was on 4 or 5 psychiatric drugs. My parents took me to court and got guardianship of me when I was 18. So I lost like all of my legal rights as an adult, and I had a court order for antipsychotics. And then I was on disability, and I did actually. So part of that story was that I wasn't allowed to leave the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts happens to have a lot of very good colleges, but it wouldn't have been my choice. When I was 14, before I was hospitalized, I wanted to go to Berkeley out here. So I applied to a couple schools in Massachusetts. I did end up I went to Clark University, which is actually a perfectly good school. So I was there till my junior year. I started drinking a lot when I was 21. I was still on a lot of psych drugs. And had like a depressive episode. I was actually doing fine in my classes despite not really going to school. But I've continued to struggle with depression, not so much mania, although I'm not even sure I really know what that is in the context of mind-altering drugs and substances and adolescence and God knows what. So I took a medical leave for depression when I was a junior in college, and I went to like a partial day program. And then when I wanted to return to school, the school basically asked me not to. They said that school wasn't for me, which seemed very clear at that point to me. Like, obviously school's not for me. At that point in my, like, since I was 14, I'd been in 6 different schools, you know? So I believed that and I dropped out. And I was on disability, and I kind of like had jobs here and there, like working in a daycare or working as a nanny or working in retail, like, and no job would ever last more than a month. And so, you know, my parents and my providers and all that would, you know, kind of reiterate the message that like work wasn't for me. And I like internalized that. I really believe that, which is ironic now because I would say people often identify me with my work. So I was out of school and living on disability and all that for about a year and a half. And then, and I mean, I still thought I was like, I'm still smart. I was like, there's got to be a way around this, you know, like I don't need school. Plenty of people don't go to school. Bill Gates was like a big person at the time, you know, it's like early 2000s. Mark Zuckerberg didn't graduate from Harvard at the same time as me. So, but I'm not one of those people. So eventually I realized that like I had to go to school to do anything that I wanted to do. And, you know, like I had the thought many times in my earlier life about that many people, other like psychiatric survivors have shared, like, this is happening to me. How do I stop this from happening to people in the future? Like, what can I do? So, you know, like I thought about working in mental health, but I always wanted to be a writer, like a fiction writer. So I went back to school and like continued I had a major in psychology when I had started. And as soon as I was in school, I was able to get like research assistant jobs, and I loved it. And I went and did like an adult independent study bachelor's program at Lesley University in Cambridge. And I was like able to design my own courses. So I did courses like on mental health policy and the mental health system, which is actually not something that people get to study in an undergraduate psychology degree ever. But like, I really found my passion in like looking at things from a system level rather than an individual level or sort of, you know, psychology. The psychology of the individual just never really spoke to me as something that was that important, or it was not like reflective of my experience. So then I finished my bachelor's and I started working as a mental health policy researcher. I guess all that to say that I've had a lot of very painful experiences in education and employment, but, you know, people can always change. Those things have been important to me. And I think having those experiences gives me brings a lot of empathy to my work. I feel a lot of empathy. I think that's like something we don't really talk about with people who work like in the level of the system that I do, which is like relatively disconnected from people who are receiving services, is like that there's like an emotional connection to the work still, that you're sort of re-experiencing trauma all of the time, even though you're just dealing with like words and numbers and bureaucrats and occasionally like activists and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I just feel like I continue to do my work so that what happened to me doesn't happen to anybody else. And I continue to have horrible experiences actually in employment and education that reinvigorate that mission all the time.
So even now you still have those experiences coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the world of work is complicated. It's where we spend like a majority of our waking hours. It's, you know, like we live in a society that emphasizes like money and work. You have to, I mean, basically everybody has to work. The people who don't have to work are probably are unhappy in their own way. So, you know, we have such an integral connection to this thing that we do with our time. I think, yeah, it's going to be painful sometimes. I mean, here's like, right, this is where it's a catch-22. It's like, if you have a personal connection to your work, well, then you're lucky because you get to do something every day that you care about. And that itself is rewarding. It makes you happy to be alive. And at the same time, if you're really personally connected to your work, there's an opportunity to be hurt. You know, it's yin and yang.
So how did you go from sort of graduating and beginning to do mental health policy work to founding your own company?
Let's see. So I worked at Human Services Research Institute in Cambridge after I finished my bachelor's. And then while I was there, I got a master's in public policy from Brandeis University. And while I was in my master's program, I applied for the PhD program at Johns Hopkins. But I had actually, when I finished my bachelor's, a professor of mine at Lesley had told me about Johns Hopkins. It's the only school of public health that has a department of mental health. And I really liked the sound of it. So I applied and I didn't get in. I didn't even know what I was applying to. But I continued to want that. So I realized that to get a PhD in the social sciences, with the exception of psychology, you typically have to get a master's degree. So, or you have to be the kind of superstar that I'm not. So I kind of got the master's degree just to get the PhD, but it ended up being one of my most valuable educational experiences. Everything I know about public speaking, I learned from that master's program. And it's astounding how much you actually need public speaking skills in life. So then I did manage to get admitted to Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, which even when I applied the second time, I still didn't know that it's a very good school, that it's the #1 school of public health in the country. So, and people kept telling me I wasn't going to get in. And I'm like, how do you know I'm not going to get in? So I got accepted. And again, I feel like it's basically public knowledge, hopefully, that Johns Hopkins is a brutal academic environment. It's really challenging. I've been through some stuff in my life, and that was for a while, a source of trauma for me. Sleepless nights, nightmares that you're I wasn't sure ever really, did that happen in an exam or was that a dream? I just felt my first year, I was really living in this no man's land between nightmares and reality. And then in my last year, or second to last year, I started the Lived Experience Research Network. And I'm sure many readers of Bad in America have probably heard of that. And so that was really my first business, but it was a nonprofit. And it was really a good example of what you don't know can hurt you. You're never going to know everything about running a business or starting a business. I think most of the people who start businesses don't know anything about business, or you probably wouldn't do it. It's PhD school that way. But we really didn't know anything about you know about the work, and you think that the important thing is whether people are going to pay you for your work, but that's not the important thing about starting a business. Yes, there has to be some kind of market for your work or you don't have a business, but it's the devil's in the details, in the personnel policies and the contracts and the budgeting and the division of labor and whatever. So that didn't work out, and it didn't work out in a very bad way. And I had to resign my position the day before my dissertation defense. I wasn't forced to resign, but it was an untenable situation. So that was a really major trauma for me. I quickly negotiated for funding to go do a postdoc at UC San Francisco. So I wanted to, I had this agenda right from when I was 14 that I was gonna go to Berkeley. So I couldn't quite negotiate with Berkeley, but I did work it out with UC San Francisco, and I moved out there. And then I knew a little bit about having a business. I knew how to use QuickBooks and file the paperwork at the IRS. So I started Live and Learn, just I don't know, some gut instinct or something, because I missed it, I guess. I liked having a business, just everything that goes into it. I liked working for myself, but I've had all this ambivalence about where to work. I felt I tried starting something myself and that didn't work out. And so I should just be in academia, but I don't really want to be in academia. And I never really knew where I wanted to work. I feel when you get a PhD in the social sciences, if you have the right skills, so you can work in government, you can work in nonprofit, you can work in academia. And I didn't want to do any of it. I was really, really burnt out at that point. I always tell people, even if you don't want to be in academia, do a postdoc after your PhD, because you're going to need the rest. You're going to need a big nap. So at the same time, actually, I had started coming off all my psych drugs in the second year of my PhD, between the second and third year. I got off like Risperdal, Lamictal, Wellbutrin, fairly easily. And then, I mean, like I white knuckled through it. I mean, I was like emotionally unstable, but I was fine. I don't know. I was used to bearing my emotions. That's part of PhD school. So, but then I still had the Klonopin, and Klonopin, as everybody knows, is like a nightmare to get off of. It took, 2 years. So like while I was in my postdoc and I was like burnt out and depressed and like had technically started a company, then I finished getting off my Klonopin, and then it's like the Klonopin, like, yes, getting off of it, titrating down is really hard, but it's the time after that you're off of it that is pretty bad. So I didn't sleep for a while. And then my postdoc funding ran out after a year and I couldn't negotiate for any more. And I mean, like I had like opportunities to do things like working for other people. And I can't do other people's work. I mean, that's a horribly privileged thing to say, but it's just like that experience that I had when I was like 21 and I dropped out of college and I had to work at the Express, and like they told me that I was folding the jeans wrong. And I'm like, I don't want to fold the jeans the way you want me to fold them. Like, I'm just like, this is a better way, or whatever. So that's how I felt about my postdoc options. And I would just be supporting somebody else's enterprise, So then I kind of, I guess, couch surfed, in LA for a bit with family and friends and like tried to work things out. And it just also felt like this horrible, like overwhelming shame that like I had already failed in my life, right? Like starting when I was like 14 to 26, like when I got off of guardianship. And then I like miraculously like got it together and I got a PhD from Johns Hopkins and I proved everybody wrong. And then like I like tripped and like fell into like an even deeper hole of failure. And you're like, well, I mean, how many times in your life can you fall out of that hole, Like maybe they're really right about me. So, but what are you going to do? Like you just keep going. So I kept trying and like I got in the academic job market and I like technically I had good options. I mean, that's part of it, right? It's like where your expectations are versus your experience, and if you just lower your expectations, you could have a perfectly good life. I mean, that's like the core of Buddhism. So it's not really for me necessarily. So, like I kept going, I was sort of hustling for live and learn and like also on the academic job market and like got some offers and had some good opportunities, but I really wanted to be in California. I just had to be here, I mean, I don't know if it was like something that I didn't want to give up because it had been this dream and I didn't want people to be right about me or if it was something I really wanted or whatever. But I was like, I'm not leaving California. So, I just kept going. And then I think it was New Year's Day of 2016. Like I called my dad and was like, I think I'm done with academia. Like I just want to work for myself. And he was like, that's fine. Like if you want to do that, but you have to really do it, So, and I did. I don't know. I mean, like I had to drain my retirement, which I only had a very little bit because I only worked like a couple of years of my life earlier. And, like just like pinching pennies and whatever. And then I moved down here to San Luis Obispo and like kind of dropped out for a little bit. I mean, still had my company, but I was like, like I don't know that I want to define myself by work anymore. Not out of like a bitterness, but just like, why? Like, why define myself by work? Like I did a lot of hard work. Like, maybe there's other things that I want to do. So yeah, I mean, it was like really touch and go for basically the first 4 or 5 years of live and learn. Like not sure it was going to work out. Still like really being hard on myself about like, maybe I should be in academia. Maybe I should just do what people tell me to do. And like, stop doing this. Why am I even doing this? And, there were like times where I was imminently going to be out of money, like unable to pay my rent. And I was like, well, I better get another job, I mean, I wanted to stay here and there aren't really jobs here. So, and I don't really have any other skills. It's a sad thing that you could be like, people would call you Dr. Ostrow, but you have to like actually know skills to get a job. So I don't know. It's been, like as soon as I was about to run off my cliff. So your cliff is in business is like when you're going to run out of money. So yeah, I have like a month left or something. And then like contracts started coming in. I mean, I started like begging for real, like I really need this. I'll do whatever you want, I'll do data analysis. Yeah. And then, I don't know, it's just kept going.
What are some of the first sort of contracts that you got?
The first ones? So yeah, like in 2015. Yeah, I mean, there's always like some goodwill in the world somewhere. Someone helps you. So like CAMPRO, the California Association of Mental Health Peer-Run Organizations, that was at the time was my biggest contract. So they gave me a $40,000 contract for the year to help them on some products that they were contracted to for the state of California. So Sally Zinman is in my heart, and for many reasons. But so Mark Salzer at Temple University has also always been there for me. So I've had contracts with his research center for a number of years, and he's actually a partner on the Certified Peer Specialist grant that we have now. I have a consulting contract with another small business in California that contracts with the State Department of Healthcare Services to do quality reviews of the county Medicaid mental health plans, which is like totally kind of outside of my normal stuff. Like I'm always like, I work with like peer-run organizations here and there, and like on our alternative mental health stuff. And this is like very much like this is mainstream mental health at the county level, like Medicaid funded mental health services. And it's so great because it's just like I see the system like in its entirety in a way that I don't normally get to see in my work. Like you're seeing it up close, but also like I'm not there really as like I'm always a survivor researcher, but that's not really why I'm there. I'm just sort of there to like make sure they're complying with their Medicaid, whatever. But you see why, like those of us who work in alternative mental health, like why it's so hard to accomplish anything. You're really up against like a massive bureaucracy where like even with the people who work there, like it just makes it very clear that like there's a system at work, and the systems, yes, are comprised of individuals, but like we're all kind of victims of our own systems.
It's something that you want to improve about sort of the way those systems work, and Live and Learn does some sort of policy advocating work. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really do, I try to stay away from advocacy specifically, I guess. I don't know. I feel like other people label me as an advocate sometimes, but I wouldn't say that there's any advocacy like apart from research. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't know. I think sometimes when you are looking at different evidence or evidence in a different way that challenges systems, you can be labeled as an advocate, even though what you're saying is just as factually correct as what anyone else is saying. So like Second Story Peer Respite in Santa Cruz, they've had a lot of issues over the years with the community fighting them. But Second Story is like the site of like the best research that we have on peer respite. So it was conducted by Bevan Croft at HSRI. So there was like I was in Santa Cruz a couple of weeks ago, and the local news did a story on the house, and it's had all kinds of stuff like the neighbors complaining about people like peeing in the yard and drinking in public and whatever, like stuff that there's no evidence that that's true, that stuff goes on there. And then and then someone at the end, that one of the neighbors at the end like had the audacity to say, "Oh, the county is funding this, and they have with no evidence that it works." That's not true at all, but if you like advocate for that perspective, it's like you're an advocate, but that person somehow is correct, even though they're totally incorrect.
So in a way, sort of having documented evidence that contradicts the way that the community is seeing that.
Yeah. I mean, so that to me is like a big priority of my work is representing other alternative perspectives, I guess, marginalized perspectives. From people on the ground, about how we're, helping ourselves or helping each other. Stuff that doesn't, if you don't ask certain questions of certain people, then you'll never know. I'm still like early in my career, but I obviously get on myself about how I haven't done enough. But so, a lot of my work is like observational, cross-sectional, like large scale surveys. And, but I like that work because, and I've got a number of different topics. And I like it because, it's sort of like the first step in elevating our perspective, like using quantitative data, bringing something into the conversation so that we can do more research. I feel like I haven't yet been as successful in getting to the next stage, but also maybe that's not my role,
What do you think that next stage looks like? What would it look like to elevate the research?
Like I think the study that we're doing now on career outcomes is a good start. I mean, first of all, because it's longitudinal, so you can answer more questions with longitudinal data than you can with cross-sectional data. So I'm really excited about that. It's my first longitudinal study. So, and then obviously you get into the world of like experimental studies. Experimental studies are really hard. I've been working with a colleague at USC for years to get a study funded on the effectiveness of peer respites compared to other kinds of crisis diversion. And we've submitted that application 4 or 5 times. It's like a joke now, and they always come back with something about the methods because we're not doing a randomized control trial. Because part of the study question is that, so peer respites are peer-run programs in a home-like environment where people can go if they're starting to feel like they might be in a crisis, or in some cases, diverted from a hospital or ER. So part of the theory of how they work is that they're available to people in the community so that you refer yourself there versus an emergency room or an inpatient unit where you sort of have to be funneled into the system and have someone assess you, and things have to be at a certain level, right? Like people, I've had this experience earlier in my life of sort of like having to get escalated before you can get help, it's a fail first system and all that. So, peer respites are an alternative to that because they're there for people when you know that you need something.
Right. You get to make
that choice. So where do you randomize people from? It's not, I think sometimes the issue of like randomization has come up in consumer survivor research because it's like, people view it as like people are forced into treatment. Like, I'm not as concerned about that because you're not. Obviously you have to be consent to be in a research study, and part of your consent for a randomized control trial is that you may be in the experimental condition or not, and you can always leave the study if you don't like how it goes. So there's no issue of forced treatment and randomization as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, so we haven't been able to get it funded because we're not doing a randomized control trial. If we did a randomized control trial, we wouldn't be doing a study of a peer respite. So I don't know. One day I figure we'll keep that proposal in the bottom drawer, and eventually people will want that research, or someone else will do it, or I don't know. Hard to.
There's such a pushback against doing that study.
Well, I understand the critique from a methodological perspective because, then the issue is how do you know whether the change that you're seeing is really attributable to using a respite versus not? And there's like, I don't want to do garbage science either. But there's, like different observational methods that you can use to control for some of those other variables. They're never going to be as good as randomization, but, we have to, I think, use some of those other, like you have to use alternative statistical methods if you want to do research on alternative services, maybe. That's why those methods exist, is to study things that are difficult to study.
And it's common to see in research studies that compare what's already happening at different sites and how different sites are doing treatment differently. And that's not randomized. So I'm just surprised that there's such a pushback against this.
Yeah, some of it I think is like just that it's very competitive to get research funded nowadays. Like, 30, 40 years ago, I think there was just a lot more money for services research. There's not money for services research now. There's not money for research in general. You can look to the people that we've elected for that. And then you can look to the people that elected them. And the other issue is, like the more, I think academic research is really all about like standing on the shoulders of giants, So it's like incremental steps towards progress. And if you take too far a leap, reviewers will have trouble seeing the value in it. They can make a safer bet on something that's a more incremental change. And that's kind of the way it works. So the career outcome study, while I'm thrilled to be doing it, my original idea, I wanted to do a study on people who get certified as a peer specialist and become self-employed. So like there are people who have like a private practice. And we all know many of them, they're sort of like working off the grid or whatever, but they get paid to provide peer counseling to people in various different ways, or to families or whatever in the community. And they're self-employed, right? They don't work for anyone, they work for themselves. So I kind of wanted to look at like business models for that and how those people experience their work. And did they leave peer support because, the environment wasn't very good and they wanted to work on their own, or they weren't able to do like authentic mutual peer support in an agency, so they're doing it on their own. But then like, how does that work? Because people are paying them directly, all of those questions. Then the counsel from my mentors, who I'm glad I listened to, is like, well, you have to take a smaller step first, like first looking at peer specialists in general, and their, where they're working other than peer support. And then assuming that some subset of those people are self-employed, then I'll have data on that. And then I can write a grant application to do that study. So it's like maybe 4 studies down the line. I don't know. You have to be patient.
I'm curious if is there a change that you would like to see in the way that our mental health systems work?
Yes. I mean, lots. But at the same time, when you start thinking about it, you're like, oh God, you just kind of like have to, I don't know, like lean into your nihilism or something because it's overwhelming. Part of it is like a problem with identification, like the people that get funneled into the mental health system and stuck there. Not that anybody deserves to be stuck there, but we don't like have really good ways of individualizing our approaches for different people. Like some, the way that I think like research is going, there's, a lot of people wanting to do research on like individualized approaches, like personalized medicine based on your genetics and other objective characteristics. But like, we don't even really do a good job of listening to people, and at the same time, I think there's a lot of good reasons sometimes not to listen to people. Like the system isn't designed to do that. There's lots of different consequences for the way that we treat people. And you never really know what's the right thing to do. I think it's like parenting, right? Like, I guess that's why it's paternalistic. Like, you don't really know. You never really know. Like everyone, you're going to screw up. We're all going to screw up. What we can do, listening to people's a good idea, trying different things, not being so attached to the way that we do things. Yeah. But, a lot of people that work in the mental health system are really burnt out. Like I was saying, I do this contract with the state essentially. And we always do an interview with the frontline staff. And like, I feel like the frontline staff are often like, just like the most rambunctious group. They're just like dying for someone to listen to them, which is ironic, and that's what I mean. Like things that I never get to hear. Like I'm always looking from the service user perspective, like, like how are you, able to advocate for yourself? Like, but then, yeah, you look just like, one tangentially related group, another stakeholder group, and like they feel the same way. It's obviously, I think, much worse for people who are their lives are entrenched in the mental health system versus just their jobs. But like I said, work is an important part of your day.
There's a way that being in this system, whether you're on the side of being a worker in the system or someone with lived experience of the system, you're either way, there's a sort of way that the system burns you out.
Yeah, but the same for like people at administrator level. I don't know. It's hard. This is where like I start to feel like, oh God, we just have too many people. Things are too complicated. If they're not complicated, we're bored. I don't know. I do think that I think that peer support, has been, in some ways a victim of its own success and is a great thing to have introduced to systems. Like, I think that, yes, there are some things that go wrong or have gone wrong or could be better about the ways that peer support has been integrated into mental health systems. At the same time, I think it's such a benefit to people who are using services who really need someone to connect with that it's just about figuring it out at this point.
So sort of figuring out what the best way to implement peer support is, or?
Yeah. Peer support, self-help is just slightly different.
So you would like it if the mental health systems allowed for more use of peer support and sort of more avenues for self-help.
Yeah, I guess. I feel like that's a statement I'm going to regret eventually saying, but I didn't say it. I just agreed.
Uh-huh.
I plead the fifth. Yeah, more, I don't know, more, you always have to be careful with more, it's like more how exactly. I think things have gotten a lot better in mental health systems. Someone said to me years ago, like, like if it wasn't for all the advocacy that, the people had done prior to me, like I would have ended up in a long-term institution, and now like those places basically don't exist. There's so few people that are subject to that kind of treatment on a long-term basis. So I think that's a huge improvement. At the same time, it's sort of like the net has like gotten shallower, but wider, and a lot of people get wrapped up in the system that don't need to be there. But then I also think that like the work that Mad in America does and sort of broadening awareness and like making people realize that that they're not alone in their experiences, for parents and things like that is helpful for also changing this much larger mental health system that we have now.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, it's been great to talk to you as well.
Thank you for listening to the Mad in America podcast. Visit madinamerica.com for more news, views, and updates.